Hello, my name is Dr. David Palmeter. I'm a psychology professor and practicing clinical psychologist. I've created this YouTube channel to help couples and parents to promote happiness, wellness, and resilience in their family lives. In today's edition, I would like to review a very important technique for reducing the intensity and frequency of conflict between a parent and a teenager. I'd like to set a context, then quickly review the technique, and then give you some closing thoughts. Anybody who lives with a teenager knows that a certain amount of conflict is inevitable. What we're trying to do is reduce how often that happens and the intensity of the conflict. There are 3 techniques that I use as a tripod for good communication in families. The first is special time. The second is this technique I'm reviewing today that I call a trained communication grid. And then the third is problem solving. There are 3 goals really in establishing this tripod. We're trying to reduce the amount of conflict, we're trying to communicate effectively, and we're also trying to teach our child, regardless of their age, good techniques to use in their own relationships, especially when there's tension or conflict. This technique that's pictured to my right involves reviewing 4 kinds of content that are present in any conflict between 2 people. Whether you're talking about conflict between spouses or a boss and an employee or friends, name it. There's 4 kinds of content that's available to be discussed. In cell number 1, we have when I'm in a conflict with someone else and I'm talking about my good intentions, the efforts I bring, the correct ways of behaving and thinking and so forth that I have engaged. In cell number 4, that's me pointing out problems that I believe the other person has shown that have contributed to this conflict. Maybe I malign their intentions or how much work they're putting forward or mistakes in judgment I believe they've made. In cell 3, I'm reviewing the positive contributions that I believe the other person has made. Their effort, their intentions, good contributions they've made. And in cell 3, I'm reviewing my mistakes, lapses in judgment, mischaracterizations I've shared, and so on and so forth. Now, if you consider conflicts that maybe you've had with a teenager and ask yourself what content you've spoken to. If you're like most people, and this would be the case across types of conflict, we're usually focusing on cells 1 and 4. We're usually talking about what we're doing right and what we think the other person needs to change. And whenever one human being brings cells 1 and 4 to another human, that human tends to respond in the same way. They share their cells 1 and 4. And when 2 human beings are doing that with each other, it doesn't take long for the communication to escalate in its intensity or just to come to a grinding halt. What we want to consider is that there's this whole other area of content that's available. And instead, try to begin with cells 2 and 3. This does a great amount to reduce conflict and open up channels of communication between me and the other person. Try this the next time you're in conflict with your teenager, or it seems like there's a conflict on the horizon. Begin with cells 2 and 3. Begin with engine content. You might believe that the engine content is 5% of the content present because you've acted wonderfully and your team's acted horribly. Regardless of what percent is there though, start with that and see what happens. Notice that, let's say there's a teen's concerned that I've broken promises in the past, and that's something they want to tell me about over the course of a conflict. Well, if I begin with that, if I start with cell 3 and I own that mistake and acknowledge that that's contributing to the problem, it goes much better than if the teen starts with cell 4. It's the same content, but it's much better delivered and much better experienced, doesn't interfere with the communication when I share it instead of being accused by my teen. It's the same thing for all kinds of areas of difficulty. So try this. Begin with cells 2 and 3 and see what happens. Now, your teenager might join you in doing the same things, or they might be focused on cells 1 and 4. After all, their brains are still developing, and they may already be upset. But it never hurts to start with 2 and 3. You can add the caboose content later if you need to. Some closing remarks are that when having a conflict with a teen, it's good to think about the time and place that you're engaging in when you can. Sometimes conflicts happen spontaneously and it's not possible to do that. But if I know that I'm going to be talking about something difficult with my teen, it's good to try to pick a time when they seem to be in the best mood or in charge of themselves. And I might even do things like go out in public, at least when that's a possibility, and go to a coffee shop or a restaurant and have the discussion there. Another thing to keep in mind, that even if your teen has a poor response, this is still worth doing. So let's say I start with cell 3, I start owning a mistake that I've made, and the teen goes, yeah, exactly, that's what I've been trying to tell you. I mean, it can feel like you've opened yourself up for needless vulnerability. But I promise you over the long haul, this will pay off. Another thing is be careful about how I define disrespect. I want to allow the teen some leeway to be able to complain about me, call me names, give them a chance to learn how to talk about these kinds of feelings. Clearly, I don't want to let them, go too far with the language they use, but try to be flexible with the amount with how you define disrespect or what you'll tolerate along those lines. Another tip is to try to allow the teen to win some arguments with the court. That is, as you're talking, especially if you're starting with your engine content, your teen may have some good points that make you want to reevaluate something you're forbidding them to do or something, a change in your lives together. The research suggests that when teens sometimes change their parents' minds about this kind of thing, they're less likely to lie. And it also shows that you're objective and willing to consider the fact that maybe you didn't evaluate this whole entire range of important pieces of information. Finally, you may want to, if your teen is operating at a reasonably decent level in their communication, you may want to share this communication grid with them and explain it and see if they're willing to partner with you. Well, that's it for today's edition. Please consider subscribing if you find this information useful. And for now, remember, we are made for love.